The term manufacturing consent comes from the landmark 1988 book by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky titled Manufacturing Consent: The Political Economy of the Mass Media. Their argument that mainstream media in the United States doesn't inform the public as much as it conditions them to accept the status quo, support elite interests, and believe they're making informed decisions, even when they're not. The gist of it: media isn't just reporting the news, it's shaping how you think about the news, and even more importantly, what you don't think about at all. According to Herman and Chomsky, there are 5 filters of media control called the propaganda model that shape all mass media content. Let's break them down. Number 1, ownership. Most media outlets are owned by giant corporations. These companies are profit driven and have ties to other elite institutions, such as banks, defense contractors, and pharmaceutical giants. Do you think NBC is going to air a serious expose about Comcast, their parent company? Yeah, right. Number 2, advertising. Media isn't funded by viewers, it's funded by advertisers. So if a story might upset a sponsor, it disappears. You're not the customer, you're the product. Number 3, sourcing. News outlets rely on government officials, PR departments, and big corporations for info. Why? Because it's cheaper and easier, of course. But it also means they report what those in power want them to hear. This makes most journalism, aside from independent journalism, so biased, corrupt, and useless nowadays. Number 4, flack. Any outlet or journalist who steps out of line gets hit with a wave of backlash, such as lawsuits, smear campaigns, and threats. This discourages dissent and self censors bold reporting. Some examples of this are the sacking of Candace Owens, Lark Lamont Hill, Mehdi Hassan, Chris Hedges, and Katie Halper, and also the censorship of scholars such as Normal Finkelstein, Rashid Khalidi, and Ilan Pape. Number 5, the anti ideology filter. Originally framed during the Cold War as anti communism, this filter operated as a powerful ideological weapon. Anything that challenged capitalist or Western hegemonic interests could be labeled communist or instantly discredited, no matter how legitimate the critique. Over time, as communism lost its central place in global politics, this filter morphed to fit new narratives. After 9/11, it became anti terrorism, where dissent or opposition to war and surveillance could be portrayed as unpatriotic or even sympathetic to terrorists. More recently, it has shifted again into anti socialism, anti wokeness, or the catch all phrase of quote unquote protecting democracy. These terms function less as clear ideologies and more as emotional triggers that legitimize elite power, discredit opposition, and rally public support around state and corporate interests, regardless of the actual policies being pushed. Let's examine a few examples where media didn't just report reality, it manufactured consent for something bigger. For example, the Iraq War. Major outlets like the New York Times helped sell the public on weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. Why? They trusted government sources, ignored dissenting voices, and created an atmosphere of fear and duty. The result? Public support for a war that killed hundreds of thousands and destabilized a region based on a lie. Today, there is the example of Gaza and the occupation. Notice how many U.S. outlets frame Israel's actions as quote unquote defensive, while calling Palestinian resistance quote unquote terrorism, ignoring decades of occupation, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing. This coverage isn't balanced, it's curated. Why does it matter? When media shapes the public conversation, it shapes policy, and by extension, real human lives. If your idea of justice, conflict, or democracy comes prepackaged from a corporate newsroom, are you really thinking for yourself? Manufacturing consent doesn't require censorship. It just requires framing, filtering, and flooding the airwaves with narratives that make elite decisions feel natural, inevitable, or rational. Even now, we can predict how the US media and political establishment might manufacture public consent for a potential war with Iran, using the same propaganda techniques that shape support for past conflicts like Iraq or Afghanistan. Most major US media outlets are owned by corporations with close ties to the military industrial complex, fossil fuel companies, and government contractors. These elites benefit from instability in the Middle East, arms sales, and strategic control over oil rich regions. Therefore, coverage will lean towards justifying intervention, not questioning it. Iranian leaders will be portrayed as dangerous extremists. And honestly, they already are portrayed this way, especially when they challenge Western hegemony. Civilians in Iran will either be ignored, dehumanized, or selectively showcased to support a narrative of quote unquote rescue or quote unquote liberation. No sanctioned or war torn country is perfect, but the chaos inflicted upon nations like Iran is not accidental, it's strategic. Empires like the United States use economic warfare, covert operations, and media narratives to deliberately destabilize countries, creating the very oppression they later claim to oppose. It's all part of the game, the cycle of demonization, destruction, and manufactured consent. Countries like Iran, Afghanistan, and others were once stable, prosperous, and relatively free until Western led economic and political sabotage derailed their development. Meanwhile, any US or Israeli casualties will be heavily emphasized to generate public sympathy and outrage, reinforcing the myth of Western victimhood to justify further aggression. I'll break this down further in another episode, but for now, just know the narrative is never neutral. Framing Iran as a threat is crucial to building consent. The public has to feel that Iran poses an imminent threat. How will they probably do this? By claims of nuclear weapons development, even if unproven, just like Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. There will also be allegations of supporting terrorism, linking Iran to groups like Hezbollah, highlighting quote unquote aggressive behavior like naval movements, drone use, or regional influence as provocations. There will probably also be false flag incidents or ambiguous attacks in the Gulf region that could be exploited as casus belli, which is Latin for quote unquote cause for war. They will set emotional and ideological filters. Originally anti communist, today's ideological filters now revolve around protecting democracy, defending freedom, and standing with our allies, like Israel. They will also frame Iran as the enemy of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and religious freedom, despite U.S. alliances with far more repressive regimes. These narratives tap into emotional instincts and bypass critical thinking. Another thing we can expect is for them to really try to control the range of debate. Media may feature only pro war voices or moderates who argue over how to intervene, not whether to intervene. Anti war activists, Iranian voices, or experts with alternative views are and will continue to be marginalized, ignored, or vilified. Platforms like social media will continue to shadow ban or algorithmically suppress dissenting content under the guise of combating misinformation. There will also be a suppression of historical context. Iran's legitimate grievances, like the 1953 CIA backed coup, US sanctions, or assassination of Iranian scientists, are rarely mentioned. History is scrubbed, making Iran look irrational, aggressive, and isolated, rather than a nation reacting to decades of foreign interference and oppression. We can also brace ourselves for the onslaught of reinforcement through entertainment and culture. Already, the Bin Laden and Saddam documentaries are being displayed in everyone's entertainment feeds. This is so obviously not a coincidence. And no one is saying these men were saints and not also problematic. But don't be misled by this same bullshit propaganda. You see, TV shows, movies, video games, and pop culture can reinforce the idea of Iranian villains and heroic Western intervention. Soft propaganda like this builds a subconscious readiness for war. So, what can or should we do about this? Are we just doomed to be brainwashed? Of course not. Everyone can start by questioning sources. Who benefits from this story being told this way? Follow independent media and grassroots journalists on the ground in the actual country in question. Let the civilians tell their stories because they are likely telling the truth, not their government or yours. Read internationally. See how the rest of the world frames US politics, war, and protest movements. And most importantly, talk to people, Iranian people. Thanks for listening.